My name is Arthur Whitmore. I'm 82 years old. I live in a house with 4 other people. My son, my daughter-in-law, my grandson, and a guest room that's always ready for my daughter when she visits. We share the same last name, the same kitchen, the same walls, and yet, somehow, I don't exist here anymore. It didn't happen all at once. No one sat me down and said, "You don't matter anymore." It was quieter than that, softer, almost polite, like a door, slowly closing, without a sound. Every morning I wake up before the others. Old habits don't leave easily. I make coffee, black, no sugar, the same way I've made it for 40 years. I sit at the dining table, the one I paid for, the one we used to gather around every Sunday. Back then, this table was loud, laughter, arguments, stories that went nowhere but somehow meant everything. Now, it's just me and the quiet hum of the refrigerator. By 8 o'clock, the house wakes up. My son, David, walks in first, phone already in his hand, eyes already somewhere else. "Morning, Dad," he says, not looking at me, not really. "Morning," I answer. He nods, pours coffee, leaves the room. That's our conversation. Susan comes next, always efficient, always kind, in the way a well-written reminder is kind. "Don't forget your appointment on Thursday," she says, already opening her laptop. "I won't," I reply. She smiles, but it's the kind of smile that doesn't wait for an answer. Ethan appears last, head down, thumb moving, world contained in a 6-inch screen. "Hey, Grandpa," he says. "Hey," I say back. He sits across from me, close enough to touch, but further away than anyone I've ever known. We sit there, 3 people at the same table, no one speaking, no one asking, no one seeing. I used to think silence meant peace. Now I know there's a kind of silence that feels like being erased. Slowly, gently, completely. So I started counting, not days, not years, words. How many I speak and how many come back. That morning, I spoke 12 sentences, and not a single one was answered. That was the moment I realized I wasn't being ignored. I was disappearing. The strange thing about disappearing is that it doesn't feel dramatic. There's no sudden silence, no empty room. Life keeps moving, exactly as it always has, just without you in it. That afternoon, I decided to test something. Not anything big, just a small story. The kind I used to tell all the time. David was in the living room, laptop open, headset on, talking about numbers I didn't understand anymore. I waited. When he finally took the headset off, I leaned forward a little. "Do you remember that bridge I worked on in Ohio?" He glanced at me just for a second. "Yeah, I think so." That was enough for me to continue. "It took us 3 years," I said. "Winter hit early that year. Everything froze before we were ready." His phone buzzed. He picked it up immediately. "Sorry, Dad. 1 sec." 1 second turned into 5, then 10. Then he stood up. "I've got to take this." And just like that, my story ended in the middle of a sentence no one would ever hear again. I stayed where I was, still leaning forward, still holding the rest of the story in my mouth. There's a strange feeling when your words have nowhere to go. They don't disappear. They just stay inside you. Later that evening, Susan was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, moving quickly, precisely, like everything in her life had a system. I stood beside the counter. I was thinking, I said, maybe this Sunday we could all have dinner together, no phones, just like before. She nodded. That sounds nice, she said, then added, without looking up, but David has a late call, and Ethan usually goes out with friends. We'll see. We'll see. I've learned what that means. It means no, just politely. That night, Ethan sat across from me again. Same chair, same distance, different world. I tried once more. What are you playing? I asked. He didn't look up. Just a game. What kind of game? A pause, then a small sigh. Just online stuff. I nodded, even though I didn't understand, even though I wanted to. I used to build things, I said quietly. Bridges, roads, things people could walk on. No response, not even a glance. I realized something then. It wasn't that they didn't love me. They did, in their own way. They made sure I had my medication. They reminded me of appointments. They kept a room for me in this house. But love, without attention, starts to feel a lot like absence. That night, before I went to bed, I wrote it down, just like I had started it doing that morning. Spoke 18 sentences today. I paused, then added one more line. None of them landed anywhere. I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and lay there in the dark, listening to a house full of people living perfectly fine without me. There was a time when silence meant something else. Not this kind, not the kind that swallows you whole and leaves no trace behind. Back then, when a room went quiet, it was because people were listening to me. I wasn't always this man sitting at the edge of the table, waiting for a moment that never comes. I used to build things, not small things, not temporary things, structures that carried weight, bridges that connected cities, roads that stretched farther than the eye could see. I remember standing at a construction site in the middle of winter. Steel beams rising into a gray sky, wind cutting through every layer of clothing, men waiting for my call. Hold it there. Lift 2 inches. Lock it now. And they listened. Every word mattered. Every decision had weight. At home, it wasn't much different. When David was younger, he used to sit across from me at this same table, not with a phone, with questions. Dad, what should I do? Dad, can you help me with this? Dad, do you think I'm ready? And I always had an answer, not because I knew everything, but because back then he believed I did. Emily used to call me every Sunday. Without fail, we'd talk for an hour, sometimes more. She'd tell me everything, her work, her worries, the things she didn't tell anyone else. And I listened, the way I wish someone would listen now. Even the house felt different, full, not just with noise, but with presence. Dinner wasn't something we fit into a schedule. It was something we built the day around. Phones stayed away, voices didn't. I wasn't just there, I was needed. That's the word I keep coming back to, needed. It's a quiet thing when that disappears. no announcement, no clear ending. One day, people stop asking, stop waiting, stop turning toward you when they speak. And if you're not careful, you don't even notice when it happens. I tried to remember the exact moment it changed, the day I went from someone they turned to someone they simply passed by. But there wasn't one, just a series of small shifts. Calls that became shorter, conversations that became thinner, silences that grew longer, until one day you're sitting in your own home and you realize you're no longer part of it. That night, I opened the notebook again, the same one I had started that morning. I didn't count sentences this time. Instead, I wrote something else. I used to be the man they needed. I stopped, read it again. Then I added one more line, slowly, carefully. Now, I'm just the man in the room. I closed the notebook, and for the first time, I didn't feel confused anymore. I understood what was happening to me. I wasn't losing them. They had already moved on, without me. Once you understand you're fading, you start reaching for anything that might bring you back. Not in a desperate way, at least not at first. Just small things, simple things, the kind that used to work without effort. That Sunday, I decided to cook. A real dinner, not something quick, not something reheated, something that takes time, something that makes people stay. I woke up early, went to the grocery store myself, walked slower than I used to, but I still knew exactly what to pick. Fresh vegetables, good meat, ingredients that meant something. By noon, the kitchen smelled like it used to, warm, full, alive. I set the table carefully, 4 plates, 4 glasses, 4 seats, close enough to hear each other breathe. When David walked in, he looked surprised. What's all this? Dinner, I said. Thought we could sit down together tonight. He nodded. Yeah, sounds good. Susan smiled when she saw it. It looks wonderful, she said. And for a moment, just a brief moment, I felt it. That old feeling, like maybe this could still work. At 6, everything was ready. Food on the table, chairs pulled out. I sat down first, waiting. David came in, but his phone rang before he could sit. I just need to take this, he said. He stepped away, still talking, still pacing. Susan sat down for a moment, looked at the table, then at her watch. I'll be right back, she said. Just need to finish something. She didn't come back. Ethan passed through the kitchen. Dinner's ready, I told him. Yeah, I ate already, he said, going out. The door closed behind him. And just like that, the table was full, but no one was sitting at it. I stayed there for a while, not eating, just looking. At the plates, the food, the empty chairs. There's a particular kind of silence that only shows up when something was supposed to happen and didn't. I told myself it was just bad timing, work, schedules, life. No one meant anything by it. That's what makes it harder. If someone had said no, at least I would have known where I stood. But this quiet drifting away leaves you standing in the middle of something that looks like love, but doesn't feel like it anymore. Later that night, I tried one more thing. I wrote them each a note. Short, simple, nothing dramatic. Let's have dinner together next Sunday. No phones. Just us. I left them on the fridge right where they couldn't miss it. The next morning, the notes were gone. No one mentioned them. Not a word, not a question, not even a polite excuse. That's when I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. I wasn't failing to bring them together. I was the only one still trying. That night, I opened the notebook again, sat at the same table, in the same chair, and I wrote, "Cooked dinner for 4. I paused, looked at the empty space around me. Then I added, "Ate alone." I closed the notebook, and for the first time, I stopped wondering what I could do differently. Because deep down, I already knew the answer. There was nothing left to try. After a while, you stop trying to be heard, not because you've given up, but because you start to wonder if the problem isn't what you say, but the fact that you're saying anything at all. That's when the idea came to me. Simple, quiet, almost invisible. I would stop speaking. Not forever, just long enough to see if anyone noticed. 72 hours, 3 days, no conversations, no questions, no answers, unless absolutely necessary. I didn't tell anyone. I just disappeared in place. Day 1 was easy. David passed by me in the morning. "Morning, Dad." I nodded. He didn't pause, didn't look twice. Susan reminded me about my medication. I raised my hand slightly, a quiet acknowledgement. She smiled and moved on. Ethan said something as he walked past. I didn't catch it, not because I couldn't hear, but because I didn't respond. And that was enough. Day 2 felt different. Not harder, just clearer. I started paying attention to things I hadn't noticed before. How conversations moved around me, like water flowing past a stone. How decisions were made without a glance in my direction. How presence and participation were not the same thing. At lunch, I sat at the table again, same chair, same view. David was on a call, Susan was typing, Ethan was laughing at something on his screen. 3 people, 3 separate worlds. I was the only one not connected to anything. I wanted to say something, anything, just to prove I was still there. But I didn't. Because that wasn't the point of the experiment. The point was to find out if I stopped reaching, would anyone reach back? Day 3 was when it settled. Not as a question anymore, but as an answer. That afternoon, I stood in the kitchen, glass in hand, and I let it slip. It hit the floor hard, shattered. The sound was sharp, loud enough to cut through everything else. For a moment, the house reacted. Susan looked up. "Be careful," she said. Then went back to what she was doing. David didn't even turn around. Ethan paused his game just long enough to glance over his shoulder, then looked back at the screen. No one asked if I was okay. No one came closer. No one stayed. I stood there for a few seconds, looking at the broken glass on the floor. Then I bent down and cleaned it up myself. Slowly, carefully, quietly. That night, I sat at the table again, notebook open, pen in hand. I didn't need to think about what to write. The answer had already been given to me. Did not speak for 3 days. I paused, then added, no one noticed. I stared at the sentence for a long time, waiting for it to feel wrong. It didn't. That's when I understood something I couldn't unsee. It wasn't my voice that had been fading. It was. And if I disappeared completely, nothing in this house would have to change at all. The strange thing about realizing you don't matter is how calm it feels right after. No anger, no scene, just a quiet kind of clarity that settles in, like dust after everything has already fallen apart. I didn't leave to prove a point. I didn't leave hoping someone would chase after me. I left because staying no longer made a difference. That morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The house was still. No footsteps, no voices, just the same quiet I had grown used to. I made coffee, sat at the table one last time, looked around the room that had once been the center of everything. Nothing had changed. That was the point. I didn't leave a note, didn't feel the need to explain something no one had asked about in the first place. I took my coat, my keys, the notebook, and walked out the front door as quietly as I had learned to live. The engine started on the first try. I sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel, waiting. Not for something to happen, but just to see if I felt anything at all. I didn't. So I drove. Past the same streets I'd taken for years, past the grocery store, the gas station, the park where Ethan used to play when he was younger. Places filled with memories that no longer belonged to anyone but me. I didn't have a destination, not really. Just a direction away from something that had already let me go. Back at the house, morning unfolded like any other day. David walked into the kitchen, poured coffee, checked his phone. "Dad," he called out once. No answer. He didn't call again. Susan assumed I had gone out, probably went for a walk, she said, which wasn't wrong. Just incomplete? Hours passed. Meetings started, emails were sent, lunch was made for everyone but me. By the afternoon, something shifted. Not panic, just a slight disruption in the pattern. "Have you seen Dad?" "No, I thought he was with you." A pause. The kind that only appears when certainty begins to crack. They checked my room. Empty. Checked the backyard. Nothing. Called my phone. I had left it on the nightstand. That's when it became real. Not because I was gone, but because for the first time they noticed. The problem was they didn't know what to do next. Not because they didn't care, but because they didn't know me well enough to look for me. They didn't know where I liked to go. Didn't know if I had friends nearby. Didn't know what mattered to me outside of this house. All they knew was that I was supposed to be there. And now I wasn't. As the sun began to set, the house grew quieter than it had ever been. Not the usual silence. This one had weight. Because, for the first time, my absence was louder than my presence had ever been. They didn't know where to look, so they started looking at what I left behind. My room was the first place, not because it held answers, but because it was the only place in the house that still felt like me. David opened the door slowly, as if expecting something to be different inside. It wasn't. The bed was made, the chair by the window exactly where I always left it. Everything in place, everything still. Too still. Susan stepped in next, looked around, not as someone searching for me, but as someone trying to understand something they had missed. "What are we even looking for?" she asked. No one answered. Because the truth was, they didn't know what mattered to me enough to leave behind. It was Ethan who found it. Not because he was looking harder, but because he wasn't looking for anything in particular. The notebook was on the desk, plain. Nothing about it suggested importance. He picked it up almost casually, flipped it open. At first, he didn't react. Just lines, short entries, dates, simple sentences. Then he stopped, went back a page, read again. "Dad?" he said quietly. David turned. "What?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He was still reading. Then he handed the notebook over. David took it, glanced at the page, and for the first time that day, he stopped moving. Spoke 14 sentences today, no response. He turned the page. Sat with him for 2 hours, no eye contact. Another page. Cooked dinner for 4. Ate alone. The words weren't long. They didn't try to explain anything. They didn't have to. Because between each line, there was something heavier than any explanation. "Kittens." Susan stepped closer, read over his shoulder. Her hand moved slightly, as if she wanted to turn the page, but wasn't ready for what might be on the next one. Did not speak for 3 days. No one noticed. The room changed after that line. Not physically, but something in the air shifted. Like a truth no one had been willing to see had finally been said out loud. Ethan sat down slowly, the phone in his hand still there, but forgotten. "I didn't," he started, then stopped, because there wasn't a sentence that could finish that thought without breaking something. David kept reading, page after page, day after day, each one the same, different words, same meaning. I was there, and no one was with me. He reached the last page, stopped, didn't read it out loud, didn't need to, because by then, they already understood what they had done. Not intentionally, not cruelly, but consistently, quietly, over time. They hadn't pushed me away. They had simply stopped reaching. somewhere along the way, I had learned to stop reaching back. By the time they reached the last page, there was nothing left to misunderstand. No confusion, no missing pieces. Just a truth they had been living beside for months without ever seeing it. If had stared at the final lines longer than the others, as if time might rearrange the words into something easier to accept. It didn't, because the last entry wasn't written to explain anything. It was written to end something. I didn't leave because I was alone. A pause. The kind that forces you to keep reading, even when you already know it will hurt. I left because I was invisible. No one spoke, not because there was nothing to say, but because anything they said now would come too late. Susan sat down slowly, the same careful movement she used for everything, except this time there was no control in it. I thought, she began, then stopped, because whatever she thought hadn't been enough to notice. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the floor. He was always there, he said. It wasn't a defense. It was a realization. That presence had fooled them into believing connection was still there. David closed the notebook to Huck, not gently, not carefully, just decisively, as if keeping it open would force him to face something he wasn't ready to carry. He didn't get lost, he said. No one responded, 'cause they all knew what came next. He left. Not by accident, not in confusion, not because he had nowhere to go, but because there was no reason to stay. The difference mattered, because you can search for someone who is lost. You can call their name, check the usual places, ask the right questions. But when someone leaves on purpose, you're not looking for where they are. You're forced to ask why they didn't want to be found. And that answer was already in their hands. David looked around the room at the walls, the table, the space I used to sit in every single day. Nothing looked different. And that was the hardest part to accept. Because it meant this had never been about a single moment. No argument, no mistake they could point to and fix. Just time. And all the moments they chose not to notice. I thought we had more time, Susan said quietly. David didn't answer, because time was never the problem. Attention was. He picked up his phone, for once, not to check something, but because he didn't know what else to do with his hands. Where would he go? Ethan asked. The question hung there, heavy, unanswered. Not because there were no places, but because they had never cared enough to know them. And for the first time, they weren't just looking for me. They were looking for the version of me they had never taken the time to understand. I didn't go far. That's the part people always get wrong. When someone leaves, they imagine distance. Miles, highways, places hard to reach. But distance was never what I needed. I just needed a place where I wasn't invisible. There's a small diner about 20 minutes from the house. Nothing special. A few booze, a counter, coffee that's always too hot or not hot enough. I've been there before, not often, just enough to know what it feels like to sit somewhere without being forgotten. The waitress doesn't know my name, but she looks at me when she speaks. That's enough. I sat in the same booth for most of the afternoon, notebook in front of me, coffee untouched, not thinking, not planning, just being. It was quieter there than at home, but somehow it didn't feel empty. I didn't expect them to find me. Not because I was hiding, but because finding me would require something they hadn't needed before. Attention. Real attention. It was already evening when the bell above the door rang. I didn't look up right away. Old habits don't leave easily. But I felt it. That shift in the air when someone walks in carrying more than just themselves. Dad! David's voice. Closer than I expected. I looked up. He was standing there, not with his phone, not with distraction. Just there. Susan behind him, Ethan just a step back. Three of them in the same place, for the first time in a long time, without anything pulling them somewhere else. They didn't sit right away, as if the space between us needed permission first. "You okay?" David asked. I nodded. I am. It was the truth, not the kind they were expecting. Susan pulled out a chair slowly, sat down across from me. Ethan took the seat beside her. David remained standing for a moment longer, then finally sat as well. No one spoke. Not because there was nothing to say, but because for once they were actually thinking about it. "I read it," David said. I nodded again. "I figured you would." Another pause. Different this time. Not empty. Just careful. "We didn't know," Susan said. I looked at her. "I know." That seemed to surprise them. Maybe they expected anger, blame, something louder. But the truth was never loud. "You didn't ignore me on purpose," I said. "You just stopped noticing." No one argued, because there was nothing left to defend. Ethan leaned forward slightly. "I didn't realize..." His voice trailed off. I gave him a small nod. "You don't realize something like that while it's happening," I said. "You realize it when it's already been happening for a long time." David exhaled slowly. We thought you were okay. I was, I said. Another pause. Just not with you. That landed. Not like an accusation. More like a weight finally set down where it belonged. I looked at each of them, really looked. Something I hadn't done in a long time. You took care of me, I said. You made sure I had everything I needed. I paused, then added, but somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me. No one moved. No one reached for a phone. No one looked away. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't invisible. There's a kind of loneliness people don't talk about. Not the kind that comes from being alone, but the kind that grows quietly when you're surrounded by people who love you and still feel unseen. It doesn't happen overnight. It builds in small moments. Missed conversations, half-listened answers, eyes that look but don't really see. Until one day, the person sitting right in front of you starts to fade. Not because they left, but because no one noticed they were still there. If you're lucky, you get a moment to see it, to stop, to look up, to really listen, and maybe to bring someone back before they decide to disappear. Because sometimes the loneliest place in the world is not an empty room. It's a full house where no one is truly present.